The beginning of the 21st century will be remembered, not for military conflicts or political events, but for a whole new age of globalization, a flattening of the world. The explosion of advanced technologies now means that suddenly knowledge pools and resources have connected all over the planet, leveling the playing field as never before. Along with customary classes on subjects such as finance, accounting, and marketing, today's MBA students are enrolling on courses for environmental policy and stewardship. Indeed, more than half of business schools require a course in environmental sustainability or corporate social responsibility, according to a survey of 91 U.S. business schools, published in October 2005. The brain is divided into two hemispheres, called the left and right hemispheres. Each hemisphere provided a different set of functions, behaviors, and controls. The right hemisphere is often called the creative side of the brain, while the left hemisphere is the logical or analytic side of brain. How quickly is the world's population growing? In the United States and other developed countries, the current growth rate is very low. In most developing countries, the human population is growing at a rate of 3% per second. Because of this bustling growth rate, the human population is well on its way to reaching 9 billion within lifetime. Lincoln's apparently radical change of mind about his war power to emancipate slaves was caused by the escalating scope of war, which convinced him that any measure to weaken the Confederacy and strengthen the Union war effort was justifiable as a military necessity. Tesla actually worked for Edison early in his career. Edison offered to pay him the modern equivalent of $1 million to fix the problems he was having with his DC generators and motors. Tesla fixed Edison's machines, and when he asked for the money he was promised, Edison laughed him off and had this to say, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Imagine living all your life as the only family on your street. Then, one morning, you open the front door and discover houses all around you. You see neighbors tending their gardens and children walking to school. Where did all the people come from? What if the answer turned out to be that they had always been there, you just hadn't seen them? The trip for the professional training will start soon, so pack the items before we leave. The trip for the professional training will start soon, so pack the items before we leave.
The competency of the language in the assignment is to use more formal words. The competency of the language in the assignment is to use more formal words.
In the dark, before the dawn, the plane was assembled. In the dark, before the dawn, the plane was assembled.
Lots of students had money and passports stolen, especially at night. Lots of students had money and passports stolen, especially at night.
It's just a feeling having tried something new and succeeds. It's just a feeling having tried something new and succeeds.
Unfortunately, their immune systems were not strong enough to fight off common earthly bacteria. Unfortunately, their immune systems were not strong enough to fight off common earthly bacteria.
Our university accommodation has a volleyball team for students to join in. Our university accommodation has a volleyball team for students to join in.
The books reserved in the library can be borrowed for up to 3 hours. The books reserved in the library can be borrowed for up to 3 hours.
The undergraduate students are teaching with a rigorous course in our psychology department. The undergraduate students are teaching with a rigorous course in our psychology department.
We are so dependent on computer that we cannot live without it. We are so dependent on computer that we cannot live without it. The following graph gives information about vocabulary for different age groups. The items include age group of 0 to 10, 10 to 20 and 20 to 30 years old. According to this graph, in 20 to 30, the value of the vocabulary is around 37,000 and that of 10 to 20 is lower, which is around 22,000. You can see from this graph that the lowest value of the vocabulary is in 0 to 10, which is 8,000. In conclusion, the higher the age, the more the vocabulary they have. The following graph gives information about commuting time in different regions in Britain, 2014. The items include London, Yorkshire, South East, North West, and South West. According to this graph, in London, the value of the commuting time is around 107 minutes, which is the highest value. You can see from this graph that the second highest value of the commuting time is in East of England, which is 71. The lowest value of commuting time is in South West, which is around 56. In conclusion, London has the highest value of commuting time. The following graph gives information about age group in China. The items include male, female, age group, and the population. According to this graph, in male, the population of age from 20 to 24 is around 52 million, and that of age from 0 to 4 is lower, which is around 45 million. You can see from this graph that the highest population of age from 80 to 84 is in female, which is around 10 million. You can also see from this graph that the lowest population of age from 90 to 94 is in male, which is around 0.5 million. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following image gives information about how a tomato seed can become a tomato plant. It shows how the process is done. The steps include tomato seed, a young plant, a mature plant, a flower, and a fruit. According to this graph, the first step is tomato seed, which is in a tomato fruit cut in half. According to this graph, the second step is to become a young tomato plant, which is green. You can see from this graph that the third step a mature tomato plant with green leaves rooted in brown soil, followed by a flower as the fourth step. The final step is a red fruit that comes out of the flower, and the cycle will start over. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The graph gives information about the Sweden government budget in 2018. According to this graph, expenditure SEK is 999 billion, which is in a blue bar, followed by revenue SEK of 1043 billion, which is in an orange bar. According to the center of the graph, it shows that surplus is plus 44, which is in a white circle. In addition, there is a white cube in the lower left corner, and there is a white 2018 in the upper left corner. According to this graph, the background is dark blue. In conclusion, this graph is about Sweden government budget in 2018, and it's very informative. The following graph gives information about stuff in the rubbish bin. This is a very beautiful picture, and it shows a number of things. According to this graph, at the upper area, there is a lot of acceptable food scrap including egg shell, fish bone, soiled paper, noodle, plate scraping, vegetable and orange, surrounding a rubbish bin. The color of the bin is gray. You can see from this graph that, at the lower area, there is a lot of unacceptable items including disposable lunchbox, diaper, animal waste, plastic container, flower pot. The color of the lunchbox is white, and the color of the flower pot is brownish red. You can see from this graph that, at the background, there is comparison between acceptable and unacceptable items in the rubbish bin. In conclusion, this picture is very informative. The following graph gives information about media in UK. The items include internet, TV, newspaper and radio. According to this graph, in internet, the value of 2005 is around 60%, and that of 2003 is lower, which is around 50%. You can see from this graph that the highest value of 2001 is in radio, which is 63%. In conclusion, newspaper has the lowest value in 2005, about 3%.
What nutritional guidelines should we be following?
Well, probably the best source of nutritional guidelines are those that are issued by the American Cancer Society or the National Cancer Institute. And the American Cancer Society, for example, offers 4 really basic, simple nutrition guidelines. The first guideline, which in my mind is the most important, is to choose most of the foods that you eat from plant sources. And we can talk more detail about that in a moment. The second guideline is to limit your intake of high-fat foods, particularly from animal sources. The third guideline is to be physically active and achieve a normal, healthy body weight. And the final guideline is to limit consumption of alcoholic beverages if you choose to drink at all.
So, Susan, one of the things we always hear about from the American Cancer Society is this 5-a-day recommendation. Maybe if you could explain to our listening audience what that actually means.
The 5-a-day recommendation is a very simple way of communicating the message to increase consumption of these plant foods. And what 5-a-day means is 5 servings per day of fruits and vegetables in total. And some people misunderstand this guideline, and they may think it's okay if I have 5 glasses of fruit juice a day and I've met my 5-a-day guideline. But the goal is really to choose both fruits and vegetables as part of the 5-a-day guideline, to vary the fruits and vegetables that you eat on a daily basis. And that alone is a very major step forward in terms of reducing your risk for cancer.
The lecture was discussing the best simple nutrition guideline, which is offered by American Cancer Society. First guideline is eating more plant sources food, second is limiting animal and high-fat source of food, third is keeping normal weight by increasing physical activity level, and fourth is limiting the alcohol and beverage consumption. She also added some information about 5 serving of fruit and vegetables should be consumed per day.
Article that you wrote that I just read, you said you wished you could take everyone back to decades ago to look at the Florida Keys.
50 years ago, think about how much change has taken place in that short period of time. We have managed to consume on the order of 90% of the big fish in the ocean, the tunas, the swordfish, the sharks. They're mostly gone. Until recently, people have had the belief that there isn't much we puny human beings could do to change the nature of the ocean, but in fact, we have, not just because of what we've been taking out, and the destructive means often applied to take fish and other creatures from the sea, but also what we're putting into the sea, either directly or what we put into the atmosphere that falls back into the sea.
So if you were going to give a grade on the health of the oceans today, what would it be?
Well, it depends on which aspect. Across the board, the oceans are in trouble. It's hard for me to assign a specific grade, maybe C-.
The lecture was discussing about the article that clarified what happened in the ocean and seas during the last decades. She also explained that we managed to consume almost 90% of big fish like swordfish and sharks during the last decade. She also mentioned that human changes the nature of the ocean, and now they try to back the atmosphere to the oceans. A specialist who repairs leaking water pipes is called as? A specialist who repairs leaking water pipes is called as?
What shape has 4 equal sides and 4 angles, and each angle is a right angle? What shape has 4 equal sides and 4 angles, and each angle is a right angle?
What thing shines at night in the sky and uses its own brightness? What thing shines at night in the sky and uses its own brightness?
In statistics, what is a circle divided into many parts called? In statistics, what is a circle divided into many parts called?
What do we call a mass of snow, ice and rock that falls down the side of a mountain? What do we call a mass of snow, ice and rock that falls down the side of a mountain?
What subject will be enrolled in university if someone wants to study human brain and experience? What subject will be enrolled in university if someone wants to study human brain and experience?
What do you call the government where the power is concentrated in the hands of one person? What do you call the government where the power is concentrated in the hands of one person?
What do we call the extra performance or show that an actor or actress gives? What do we call the extra performance or show that an actor or actress gives?
How often does February have an extra day? How often does February have an extra day?
What is a painting of person head usually called? What is a painting of person head usually called?
Where would you find an urban area, in a city or in the countryside? Where would you find an urban area, in a city or in the countryside?
What do we call it when the moon completely blocks out the light from the sun? What do we call it when the moon completely blocks out the light from the sun?
Your body is composed of trillions of cells. Lots of different types of cells that make up different organs and other parts of your body. Your body is also where 10 times that number of bacteria call home sweet home. But don't be afraid, these bacteria do more good than harm to you. And besides, just in case you wanted to strike up a conversation with your tenants, you and your bacteria do have a few things in common. All cells share some common characteristics that make them living things. All organisms are composed of cells, the basic fundamental unit of life. They contain DNA as a heritable genetic material, and they can reproduce. They transcribe DNA into RNA and translate RNA into proteins on ribosomes. They can also regulate transport across the cell membrane and require chemical energy for some cellular processes. The number one biggest difference between the bacteria in your body and the cells making up your body are these tiny cellular components called organelles. You've actually learned a lot about organelles in other lessons without knowing it. Organelles are simply membrane-bound compartments within a cell, such as the nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplast, Golgi, and endoplasmic reticulum. You are a eukaryote. Your cells are eukaryotic. Eukaryotic cells contain membrane-bound organelles, including a nucleus. Eukaryotes can be single-celled or multicelled, such as you, me, plants, fungi, and insects.
What I'm going to focus on today is really different, larger forms of genetic variation involving essentially gains, losses, and inversions of sequence. So shown here is a fairly, in a simple diagram, we have an example of some structural variation, operationally defined as events greater than a kb in size. So we have pieces of DNA that sometimes become deleted. We have pieces of DNA that sometimes become duplicated on chromosomes, and regions which can be, in fact, inverted or turned around with respect to another orientation. So this very busy map here represents probably about 3 years of work in my lab just to kind of characterize the general pattern of structural variation in 8 human genomes. So shown here are different human chromosomes, 4 from African and 4 from non-African. The distinctions really aren't that important. But what I'm showing you here is the presence of insertions, deletions, and inversions as blue, red, and green. And so each line here represents a different human genome that has been analyzed, looking for structural variation events greater than 5,000 base pairs in size. So a couple of things you can maybe get from this is you can see that there's a lot of genetic variation out there that is above the level of single base pair change. And most of the events that you're seeing here are essentially inherited, but we now know, based on studying roughly about 2,000 human genomes, that there's a significant fraction of very large events, often hundreds of kb in size, that are either individually specific or specific to specific families. So this is kind of changing our view of the dynamic nature of the human genome.
Listen to a discussion in a music history class. The class is studying improvisation.
Every jazz player knows what he or she means by improvisation, and all writers know what they mean by improvisation. The result, of course, is a lot of confusion and disagreement about what improvisation really is. We hear about the different types of improvisation: free improvisation, and controlled improvisation, and collective improvisation. What does it all mean? Yes, Mary?
My dictionary says improvise means to compose or recite without preparation.
That's true, but it tells us only part of the story. As we know, musicians learn how to play their instruments before they can improvise, so they do have some preparation. Yes, Arthur?
Maybe a better definition is composing and performing at the same time.
That tells us another part of the story. Let's try to understand it more by looking at history.
Long-term exposure to noise can lead to loss of hearing. The relative loudness of sounds is measured in decibels. Just to give you an idea of what this means, the sound of a whisper is 30 decibels, while a normal conversation is 60 decibels. The noise a vacuum cleaner makes is around 85 decibels. The danger zone, the risk of injury, begins at around 90. Continual exposure to sounds above 90 decibels can damage your hearing. Loud noises, especially when they come at you every day, all this noise can damage the delicate hair cells in your inner ear. Lots of everyday noises are bad for us in the long run. For example, a car horn sounds at around 100 decibels. A rock band at close range is 125 decibels. A jet engine at close range is one of the worst culprits at an ear-busting 140 decibels. The first thing to go is your high-frequency hearing, where you detect the consonant sounds in words. That's why a person with hearing loss can hear voices, but has trouble understanding what's being said.
Now choose a discussion in a history class.
Did anyone happen to catch the American metropolis last night? It was about the growth of cities.
I didn't see that, but I did see part of a documentary last week that told about a guy, I think he was a visitor from another country, who wrote a book about the growth of industry and so on, the things we've just studied. I remember he said there was a huge population explosion that turned America into a nation of cities all within a decade. He was talking mostly about Baltimore.
Baltimore then or now?
In the 19th century, right after the Civil War.
The program you saw was part of the same series as the one I want to tell you about. Last night the topic was New York City. As early as 1880, the federal government wrote a report on how the 5 separate municipalities of New York actually constituted one vast metropolitan area. It was a progressive way of thinking at the time, and within 20 years, those 5 municipalities were officially united as a single city by a vote of the people.
To this day, however, each borough maintains traces of its original independence.
I agree with that. I'm from Brooklyn, and it's definitely different from the rest of New York.
If you have paraskevideckatriophobia, today is not your day. That's right, paraskevideckatriophobia is fear of Friday the 13th and the accidents, mishaps, and misfortunes thought by some to occur on that day. But is there anything really to fear? In fact, a study was conducted and published back in 1993 in the British Medical Journal that looked at hospital admissions due to accidents on one Friday the 13th compared with the previous Friday the 6th. The researchers tracked traffic on a highway in one part of England and found that many fewer cars were on the road on the 13th, perhaps due to people being leery of driving on that day, but hospital admissions in that area due to traffic accidents were actually higher. 45 people were admitted on the 6th, but 65 people were admitted on the 13th. The researchers concluded that a few people were indeed unlucky on that Friday the 13th in that part of England. Then again, what you really needed for this study was a control group that stays home only to slip in the bathtub.
Spring is in the air, and so are those dang insects hungry for a blood meal. The victim can wind up with a bunch of bites, red and itchy. So what drugs can quench that itch? Maybe none, according to a study in the Drug and Therapeutics Bulletin. Researchers reviewed the literature on a variety of treatments. Topical antihistamines, generally not recommended. They're only marginally effective and shouldn't be used for longer than 3 days. Oral analgesics like ibuprofen are sometimes recommended, but the scientists say there's no evidence supporting that. Topical anesthetics such as lidocaine are only marginally effective and can sensitize the skin, meaning the itching could ultimately get worse. And common topical steroids like hydrocortisone? The problem here is that they're not supposed to be used on broken skin, and if you've been scratching, that skin may already be broken. The authors recommend a simple approach: clean the area and use a cold pack to tamp down inflammation and numb the nerves. If you haven't broken the skin, try the steroid cream. But your best approach may be ice. The cold hard fact is that this cold hard treatment works.
A hurricane is a massive storm system. In fact, it's the most powerful type of storm on Earth. Hurricanes form over warm tropical waters and frequently move toward land. Before I forget to mention this, hurricanes are also called typhoons or cyclones. It depends on where exactly they form. Not all hurricanes are alike. Some are, more powerful than others. Meteorologists have a rating system for them. They use the term category to rank every hurricane that forms. The scale ranks hurricanes according to their wind speed and ability to cause damage. A Category 1 hurricane is the weakest. A Category 5 hurricane is the most powerful. A hurricane typically begins as a tropical storm. It has wind speeds between 50 to 100 kilometers per hour. When the wind blows faster than 100 kilometers per hour, the tropical storm has become a hurricane. A Category 1 hurricane's winds are between 100 to 130 kilometers per hour. A Category 2 hurricane has winds up to 160 kilometers per hour. Winds between 160 and 185 kilometers per hour indicate a Category 3 hurricane. A Category 4 hurricane has wind speeds up to 220 kilometers per hour. Anything above that is a Class 5 hurricane. Thankfully, those are quite rare. They are simply devastating when they form and make landfall. Oh, by the way, before you ask, typhoons and cyclones use different measuring systems. So what I just described only applies to hurricanes.
It's common sense that some objects are harder than others. We refer to this characteristic as hardness. But what exactly is hardness? Let me tell you. It's the ability of a material to resist being damaged, scratched, or marred in any way. There's even a way to measure it. It's the Mohs scale of hardness. A German scientist, a mineralogist named Friedrich Mohs came up with the scale in 1812. Here's how he made it. Mohs took 10 different minerals. Then he rated them from 1 to 10 based on their ability to withstand damage and to damage other materials. Talc received a rating of 1. It's soft, it's easily scratched, and can hardly damage anything. Diamond received a rating of 10. It's the hardest natural substance known to man. The other objects on the scale that number from 2 to 9 are gypsum, calcite, fluorite, apatite, feldspar, quartz, topaz, and corundum. I see worried looks on your faces. Don't worry about writing them down. They're listed on page 234 of your text. Take a look. Now, what about the hardness of other objects? It depends on which of the 10 minerals can scratch them. For instance, your fingernails get a rating of 2.5 on the Mohs scale. So talc and gypsum can't scratch them, but calcite can. What are some others? Let's see. Iron is rated between 4 and 5. Glass is between 6 and 7. And steel is close to 8.
Did any of you notice those strange greenish-colored lights in the sky last night? Anybody? Mark?
I did, sir. They were beautiful. But, what were they?
We call them the northern lights, but they're also called auroras. There are 2 types of auroras, those in the northern hemisphere and those in the southern hemisphere. In the north, we call them the Aurora Borealis. In the south, they're the Aurora Australis. Auroras appear as colorful streams of light in the sky in high northern and southern latitudes. They frequently occur during the months before or after the equinox. The equinox happens in March and September. That's when the planet is tilted so that it's neither pointed away from nor toward the sun. So, why do auroras occur? They're the result of a reaction in the upper atmosphere. Solar winds hit the Earth's magnetic field. This may excite the oxygen and nitrogen atoms in the atmosphere. After some time, the atoms become relaxed. As they relax, the electrons in these atoms give off energy. This energy appears in the form of light. The color of the light depends on whether it comes from oxygen or nitrogen. In addition, the height in the atmosphere helps determine the colors that the light forms. Also, just so you know, oxygen usually emits a green or brownish red light. Nitrogen typically gives off a red or blue light. Most auroras are green in color.
Good afternoon, Miss Davis. I was told by James that you wanted to see me in your office.
Oh, I did. Thank you for coming, Jean. Have a seat. How are you? Is everything going fine?
Yes, pretty much. What about you, Miss Davis? I haven't seen you for a while.
Yes, I was away for a while. Actually, I went to Arizona and met your mother there. Didn't she tell you about it?
No, she didn't, but that's great. How is she?
She is fine. To me, she is still as exuberant as she was 20 years ago. You will never know how great a teacher your mother was. Anyway, how was your semester?
It was fun. The teachers were nice, especially Miss McKenna. I loved her class. Strange, I never liked math and struggled so much until I met Miss McKenna.
That's great. How was she so wonderful?
She spoke softly and explained thoroughly. She answered all of the questions earnestly. I wish all my teachers were like Miss McKenna.
Many of her students made that comment in the past, too.
Who could have guessed that I could get an A in math?
Why not? You're smart. You can get an A in any subject you want as long as you try.
I believe so. I should have tried harder instead of giving up and neglecting the hard subjects.
In my opinion, Pocahontas was a spy for the colonists. Yes, she served as a mediator between the British colonists and the Native Americans, but she was more of a spy. As you know, she even provided vital food supplies to the colonists. However, she didn't think of herself as a spy, and the colonists didn't trust her much despite her help. In a way, we could say she was a sad spy. Unfortunately, a war broke out between the Powhatans and the colonists. The colonists captured her and brought her to Jamestown. While she was in Jamestown as a hostage, she freely converted to Christianity and married John Rolfe. As we all know, this marriage brought the war to its end. What do you think? Was she a mediator or a spy? I believe she was a spy who played a role as a mediator. We are going to discuss mitosis. Mitosis is a process of cell division. As a result of cell division, two daughter cells are produced from a single parent cell. The daughter cells are identical to one another and to the original parent cell. Mitosis includes 4 phases called prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Let's discuss each phase here. In prophase, each chromosome duplicates to form 2 sister chromatids. In metaphase, the chromosomes line up at the equatorial plate and are held by microtubules and the centromere. In anaphase, the centromeres divide and sister chromatids separate and move toward the matching poles. Finally, in telophase, daughter chromosomes arrive at the poles and the microtubules disappear. The chromatin expands. The cytoplasm divides and the cell membrane pinches inward, producing 2 daughter cells.
Parents and other adults with whom children have close contact have a powerful influence on children's food preferences. Children are very sensitive to the reactions of those around them, and if they see others enjoying a particular food, they will be inclined more favourably towards that food. Thus, if parents want to persuade their children to eat more vegetables, then rather than simply telling them what to eat, it's more effective to demonstrate that they themselves
Let's see what's happening on the seabed. Okay, so these really remarkable features are known as black smokers. Don't forget, we're now 2.5 kilometres down. The light, it's all pitch black. What we're seeing is the lights from the submersible. So imagine you're looking at this out from your porthole, and it supports
Only 3 Arab countries, Jordan, Egypt, and Palestine, which had signed the peace accords with Israel, have sent their guards to attend the funeral of Mr. Shimon Peres, a former president and prime minister of Israel. Dozens of foreign dignitaries, including USA President Barack Obama and Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General United Nations, are reaching in Israel to attend the swearing-in ceremony of Shimon Peres, one of the country's founding fathers and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who had re-signed the Oslo Peace Accord in 1993, along with Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, for a lasting war between Israel and Palestine.
Color models, which are also known as color spaces, are basically languages to express what colors actually are. The most well-known color maze is RGB, which consists in describing colors through providing numbers to indicate their levels of red, green, and blue respectively. RGB is an additive color model, which means that it's based on colors that are created by fixing a number of different light colors, being red, green, and blue, the most common primary colors used in this system. The attractive color system, on the other hand, is based on the secondary colors that are produced with primary colors in the additive model. Thus, for instance, cyan, magenta, or yellow, which are secondary colors in regard to the additive model, are primary in the subtractive model. TVs and computer monitors are great examples of additive color, since their pixels are composed of red, green, and blue subpixels.
The school canteen sells a large variety of water and food. The school canteen sells a large variety of water and food.
We are researching on the most significant challenges we are facing today. We are researching on the most significant challenges we are facing today.
People have been independent by using phones in everyday life. People have been independent by using phones in everyday life.